Welcome to the 3 Degrees of Freedom podcast, where we explore lifestyle engineering with our expert guests to bring you in alignment with your own 3 degrees of freedom, location, time, and financial independence. All right, and today we've got Taylor Loht, a real estate investor specializing in multifamily and self-storage investments. How are you today, Taylor?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be fun, and thank you so much for coming on the show. For those who don't know Taylor, he is on a mission to teach busy professionals how to build passive wealth through real estate. He's mastered the art of creating income streams without the hassle of dealing with tenants, toilets, and termites. And he imparts the wisdom of expert real estate investors on his highly popular podcast, The Passive Wealth Strategy Show, which so far has garnered over 300,000 downloads. I don't know as of when, Taylor, but that's probably more than that now. And as a founder of NT Capital, Taylor focuses on multifamily and self-storage real estate in the thriving Sunbelt markets. And Taylor's involvement in commercial real estate ventures has surpassed over $250 million in assets. And alongside his wife, Sandra, Taylor resides in Richmond, Virginia, cherishing their life outside of real estate pursuits as well. So, Taylor, like I said, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, buddy.
Thanks so much. I appreciate you having me. I love your read of that. I can't remember. I don't know who wrote that, but it sounds new to me.
Yeah, no, it is new. And I can tell you who wrote it. And I can tell you that the initials of the person who wrote it is AI.
Okay. Nice.
Anyways, let's go ahead and get going here. As one of the first questions that we'd like to ask all of our guests is about the 3 degrees of freedom itself. That's the name of the show. And so we want to know which of the 3 degrees of freedom you think that you feel you're most ahead of versus the other two. And then I would like to understand which one of those you want to continue developing, or which ones you see a biggest opportunity for you to develop and why.
Sure, absolutely. So I would say the furthest that I've progressed on the 3 of those is financial freedom. And in my mind, that is the one that enables the other two the most. Once you achieve financial freedom, then the other two, again, in my mind, are not automatic by any sense, but they can fall into place a little bit more easily. If you're to ask me what the second most important one to me would be, if my interpretation of the question is correct, to me, time freedom is more important than location freedom. And I base that on, so over 10 years ago now, somewhat early in my career, I spent a lot of time traveling. I was on a plane just about every week, flying across the country from my job at the time. And it was a good time for me to do that in my life, to spend a lot of time traveling. But at the end of the day, probably the most important thing that I learned at that time, as a much younger man with no obligations, no wife, I didn't own my house at the time, and nothing that I had to be at home for, but I was deeply unhappy. And that deep unhappiness preceded the high travel percentage part of my life. But the big lesson that I took out of that is, wherever you go, there you are. Now, I certainly did not make that up. There's a whole book, wherever you go,
Yeah.
there you are. You take yourself with you when you travel mentally. You take all your hangups and baggage and everything like that along with you traveling. And ultimately, that I learned that the kind of happiness that I thought I would get, or the satisfaction I thought I would get out of traveling a lot. Now, granted, it was for a job. It wasn't traveling where I wanted to, but it still was like not being in an office all the time, which was great. I loved that part. I just found that the life satisfaction that I was seeking was not to be found, in a plane going somewhere new. Now, the opportunity to do that was fantastic. I'm very glad that I did. Learned a big lesson out of it. But I think the I don't mean to rag on social media too much, but I think the kind of glamorous Instagram lifestyle that a lot of us think we want, at least in a certain sense, I did. Now, granted, I don't even remember if Instagram was around at that point. It was more than 10 years ago. I certainly wasn't on Instagram at that point. I think we think that'll bring us satisfaction in life when in reality, at least for me, I can only really speak for myself. That type of thing doesn't bring me satisfaction. Now, I love traveling. I love going and seeing new places and being able to be where I want to be when I want to be there. But ultimately, I like my creature comforts. My wife and I own our home. I love working on the house. I love doing stuff around the house much more than I ever thought that I would. Honestly, I thought I'm not going to be that boring guy obsessing over his yard. And yet here I am. That's what I do. I obsess over the yard. I don't know why, but I do. So that's a long-winded way of saying that's why time freedom is more important to me than location freedom.
Yeah, I love that. And I appreciate you making that distinction for us, because the way that my story unfolded was I actually had location freedom first, and then that was able to help me lower our expenses because we were living in a very expensive part of the country. And I know that's not the case with everyone. So I really love that distinction, because not everyone is me. And I like to hear that, because the world would be a very boring place if it was. And I appreciate your honesty as well, saying that all this full-time travel is not really cracked up to what it's supposed to be, especially if it's for a job. So I completely understand that. That being said, can I ask you then, because right now, obviously you said that financial freedom is the lead domino. That's the most important thing, because it does enable the options that you can have in the other 2 degrees of freedom, your time freedom and your location freedom. Between financial freedom and time freedom, which one do you want to continue to work on the hardest? What is the most important to you right now? Because I know that everyone's always working on financial and all of the 3 at some degree. But I'm curious your take, whether financial is the way you want to go or time.
It's an interesting question. And it's hard to separate the two because I think they're somewhat intermixed, and especially with my particular method of investing in real estate, you can't necessarily just invest more of your own time to grow your business. That is definitely part of it, but growing in, say, multifamily and self-storage, it's more than just your own time, because then you're just working in your business. You need to be working on your business as much as you can. So they're somewhat joined together, but honestly, to me right now, working as hard as I can on the financial freedom aspect of that is most important. And I'll tell you why. So my wife and I have been married for, as we talk, just under 2 months, just a couple days shy of 2 months. And we're both working hard on our own respective things, but we don't have children at this point. But it's probably going to happen, right? That's been a conversation. We talk about it. It's probably going to happen down the road. And at that point, my time priorities and life priorities in general are really going to shift, right? That time is no longer going to be mine. But if you ask people who have kids, they're going to tell you, you have no time anymore at all. And I understand that. So right now I see my opportunity, given my age, I'm 33 and we've done all these real estate deals and everything, my long-term opportunity to create the life that I envision, and also assuming we have children, which is certainly the plan, by investing my time in my financial freedom, I can create a life and a level of wealth in the future that I wouldn't be able to otherwise, if that makes sense. And it's difficult to really pin that down because I have a vision in my mind in some ways, but to me, financial freedom or financial independence, I don't dream of having an amazing car. I have a nice car now, but it gets me from A to B. It's comfortable. The sound system's good, but it's not the nicest thing in the world. If you were to quadruple my net worth right now, I can't really, that would get me to financial freedom for sure. No question about it. I'm not that far away, but I can't tell you with a straight face that I would go and buy another car. I probably wouldn't. I don't really care about that stuff. So investing my time in creating that level of financial freedom so that down the road, when I don't have that time to invest in the financial freedom, but I have the financial freedom to, if we do want to travel at that point, or just be a provider in general, that kind of a thing. So that's the way I think about it now.
It sounds like an approach from someone that is a deep planner and gives lots of thought to where you want to go. And I think that's just a point that I want to make, is that by thinking about these 3 degrees of freedom and what options you want to have, it's giving you a vision for the future, or maybe vice versa. Maybe you are, using a vision that's in your mind, or you and your spouse's mind, to decide like how you want to grow in life together, and using that to help craft where you're going to put your energy and what priorities are important to you. Because if your priorities are travel and recreation, having a good time, then your life is going to look very different than if it's specifically on the investing side and trying to work on your business systems and stuff like that. Just a small offshoot question to this is, what does your vision look like? And is your vision, does it inform this decision that you're making? What does your practice look like around that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say I try to have long-term plans and visions, but also not constrain them too terribly much, because if you would have asked me again 10 years ago, what do you want your life to look like in 10 years? I would have been so wrong, because I didn't know about, frankly, I don't think I had the knowledge of the world that I have today in many ways. I didn't
Yeah.
know myself that well. I think most men in their early 20s, if I'm a reflection of anybody, we don't know ourselves that well. You got to go out and continue to participate in the world. And I was learning and learning more about my own priorities. And if you asked me 10 years ago, do you want to be married in 10 years? I didn't have the life design to the point where I thought, I just couldn't envision that being a part of my life in many ways. So I might have been wrong about that. So I try not to be too constrained with those things. I have visions in my mind of what I want my real estate portfolio to look like, but I couldn't tell you that I want to own a certain number of buildings in a certain market or anything like that. It's more broad than that. It's a certain level of cash flow and all that kind of a thing that the goal is to create. The vision is with regards to the business, in terms of having more people in place than I do now to run the deal pipeline, run our investor pipelines, run marketing, that kind of a thing. There's certainly a vision there that's growing with time. On a personal life note, I think speaking of planning, one of the things that kind of leads me back is, this is a question that I had thought to myself in my mid to later 20s, at the time when my now wife and I weren't quite together yet. And I couldn't really see myself being married in a certain way because I hadn't met the right woman yet. I ultimately did, and I'm very happy now. But until I had the right fit, I just couldn't see it. In my mid late 20s, I was asking myself, wondering, what does my life want to look like in 20 years? Do I want to be someone in 20 years who hasn't had children? No, I don't. I think I do. So great. I need to set my trajectory to hit that target. But if you're over constraining, then I think you in some ways miss the mark, and you also miss opportunities along the way, if that makes sense. And it's hard to have a vision of what those look like. So yeah, we do have themes and goals and visions, but again, I think it's important to not be too constrained about that. And so when I was half my age that I am now, all I wanted, maybe not all I wanted, but really wanted a BMW, right? I like BMW. I still like BMWs today. I can afford a BMW today. I don't drive a BMW today because my vision, my goals, my priorities have changed. And frankly, I know what it takes to earn the money to buy one, because I have done that many times. But I also know what happens with that money when you put it into a car, it goes away. But if you put it in cash flowing real estate, then it continues to add and snowball to your life. You have to be open to
Yeah.
change. Think about your priorities, your long-term vision. Think about themes, but I think not get too laser focused on one specific.
Constrained.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's important to realize when setting plans. That's why usually for Sophie and I, we set 3 to 5 year visions, because that's right about in the time frame where you can achieve something amazing or more than you think. 3 years is a long time, but on paper, it doesn't seem like that long. It just is. It's a great unit of time that you can use to be able to predict what your current self would want to achieve. And I love that you said that things change and you have to be open to change, because different circumstances change the way you approach your life, right? Like you may have different people come into your life, so it may be different. You may have different circumstances. You may have a health, if something happen with your health, things evolve, right? And we become different people based on what we allow into our brains and what happens around us. And so I think that it's really great that you said that things move and you didn't know who you were back then. I didn't either. And honestly, I have a feeling that 10 years from now, we're going to be looking back and saying, man, I didn't know who I was in my 30s. It may be a little bit better than the difference between the 30 looking back to the 20, but I know that there's always going to be some aspect of that, because as you achieve your goals, you become a bigger person, you start growing. And then you look back and you're like, oh man, that goal of the BMW, that was nothing. That's something that like I've got down pat now and I've learned how to do that. And now I'm a different person. So now it's time for me to build a portfolio, or it's time for me to build a house on every continent or something amazing, something that will compel you and move you forward. That was just, quite frankly, not even in the sphere of recognition of what you could put in as a possible goal in your 20s. So I think that's amazing. Now, I do want to shift gears here. I want to talk a little bit more about your superpower, which is persistence, because that, if I'm correct, may be the common theme that has stuck with you ever since you started your career. Let's talk about your superpower. How has your superpower fed into or played a role in your current journey towards creating all of this freedom and your success so far?
Yeah, absolutely. In the investing world, your listeners are going to know, you're going to know that real estate doesn't happen overnight for anybody, right? You might be able to point to one or two, but they might be juicing the stats a little bit. So just doing that first deal can take a long time. But even once you've done that first deal and you go to number two and so on, there are going to be setbacks along the way. Maybe a deal falls through. Maybe something doesn't turn out to be as profitable as you want, or a business partnership falls apart, that kind of a thing. And me personally, we say persistence. When people ask me, I say persistence. To me, I might just be stubborn and a little bullheaded, but I think they're one and the same. Just stubborn is maybe a little more pejorative. You set a goal and a target and you just keep working at it. The thing that you can't be too stuck on is your method, right? Because as you learn and grow, especially in the real estate investing space, you find that there are other possibilities, but that then gets you into the realm of shiny object syndrome, where you're bouncing between one and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So you're not staying consistent. So for me, I went through that period of struggling to do that first deal and then experiencing shiny object syndrome, because I still wanted to work at things, but I didn't understand, I think at the time, the power of persistent focus on one thing. Then once I started to recognize and learn the power of persistence and stick to one thing, it all started to fall into place. But even that first deal doesn't happen automatically. You need to keep going. And
Yeah.
that second deal doesn't happen automatically. You got to keep going and moving forward, and there can be setbacks. So I think that's really, persistence is so important, and it's hard to do. I think even for me, I say it's something that I can do. I have good days. I have great days. I have less good days. I don't want to say bad days, but days where there are
Yeah.
setbacks or don't move forward. But ultimately, still staying focused on the goal and working at it every day helps.
Yeah, yeah, that's really well said because I can completely relate with all of that. And I think that I also have a stubborn streak to me too. And I feel like I've got an ability to persist through things despite maybe even it being even unhealthy for me, honestly, to persist through something. I'll be honest, like that's just the way that it is. Now, let's say that someone has recognized that persistence is something that maybe they want to work on. So maybe they want to be more self-disciplined or more persistent, whether you define that as hard-headed or stubborn, however you want to call that. What would you give? What advice would you give to someone who want to become better at that, which would then lead to business success or success in many different areas of life?
So I think one of the things that has helped me a lot, and we haven't touched about on it yet, but I have a book over here on my right, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've been doing Jiu-Jitsu since 2015. That's actually where I met what my now wife. She was not my wife at the time that I met her, obviously, but just the process of going to the gym where, and training with guys who are bigger and better at submission grappling than I am, which happens all the time, several times a week. After we're done on this call, I am going to the gym and I'm going to get beaten up, hopefully not injured. That's the one thing, is not get injured, but you're getting smashed, choked out, sometimes injured, but really uncomfortable situations and scenarios. And just progressively learning that when you start out, the first time you get choked out by somebody, and just not put to sleep, but the first time you get put in an uncomfortable situation by somebody who's better than you freak out. You can't take it. But the second time, you go a little further, you go a little harder. And I think that skill of seeing the gradual progression and showing up when you know this is going to be uncomfortable applies to the entirety of the rest of your life. So if you can cultivate something like that, I'm not saying it has to be jujitsu. I love doing yoga too. And you know what? If you get the right yoga program, it can be really stinking hard,
Oh
but
yeah.
you still have to show up and do it. About a little over 10 years ago, prior to no, I was traveling a lot at the time. I'm a terrible swimmer. I can float, I can get across, I can survive. But if you ask me to do laps, I can't do it to this day. And I couldn't at the time. My sister, on the other hand, is a literal champion swimmer. She was performed very well when she was in high school, set all these records that still stand today, 16, 17 years later. She went to Princeton to swim at Princeton. Amazing. She's so good. And one day she said, I signed up for this triathlon. I don't know exactly why she signed up for it, but I said, I'm going to do it too. And for your listeners that don't know, there's a swim involved in a triathlon. And it was in this lake, it's a cloudy lake. And I said, let's go for it. I can ride a bike pretty well. I can run if I have to. But the swim, man, that freaked me out. It honestly scared me. So I prepared for months and months. I got in the pool. Man, the first time, I don't even think I made it halfway down the pool. Like I could not do it. But you know what? I got on YouTube and got guides and learned how to swim laps. And eventually I was able to consistently swim laps. Now they weren't very good, but I could make it. I made it back and forth. I could do a half mile or something at a time. Wasn't that big a deal. Not fast, but I could get it done. And you know what? The day came, I got, I think, second in my age bracket. I was very pleased with that performance. My swim was awful, but I made it. I made it around. And I think that process of whatever it is in your life, especially for a physical activity, continually pushing yourself and putting yourself in these uncomfortable situations that you have to push through, those little experiences apply to the rest of your life. You might not be able to see it, but that, again, persistence through these uncomfortable scenarios where I've committed to myself to do something. I'm not going to drop out of this triathlon. At least at the time I'm not going to ever do
Yeah.
another one. I hated it, but I did it. And I think the experience of gutting through things like that, especially physically, to me helps a lot. And I think cultivate something like that in your life and stick to your vision, cultivate a physical activity like that in your life, and you'll be disciplined enough to be persistent in the pursuit.
I have to say that when you are looking to do something like this, there's something very humbling, at least in my mind, as I'm thinking about what you're going to go through, of you knowing that you're going to walk into a place where you're probably going to get choked out, you're probably going to get pinned, and you're probably going to be in some level of discomfort, right? And you know that's going to happen, but yet you still do it. And I think that's something, putting my mind in the mind of someone who isn't you, that's what I think is going through their mind is, I don't want to go through that discomfort. But I think that what you're willing to do is take those little daily choices of knowing that little bit of discomfort adds up to building your character, right? It makes you become a bigger person. And so if you can swallow it in bite-sized chunks, right? Face your fears, face the discomfort, and just make it a part of who you are, so that you facing discomfort is now just a daily event. It's just something that you do. I think that's like kind of key to that persistence in you saying, I'm not going to cut corners to hit my goal. And so that's just something that I observed right there. And I think it's super helpful for people to learn from you in that regard. I don't know. Would you find that accurate?
I think so, yeah. And I think making yourself uncomfortable in safe ways, obviously. I'm not telling anybody to go jump out of a plane or anything. I'm not ever going skydiving, but
Yeah.
making yourself uncomfortable. So to give you an example, one of the things I like to do, I'm not great about it, but I like to do intermittent fasting. I've been doing it for, I don't know, something like 14 years on and off. I'm very much not perfect about it. I've had times in my life where I'm really good and dialed in. And then I have times where I slack and everything, and I have to come back to it and remind myself. Right now, I'm 18 and a half hours in. And this, I don't do this every day, but a lot of days when I train, I will fast all day, go to the gym, come home, eat when I get home, hopefully cross my fingers. My wife makes some awesome dinner tonight. But that experience
Mm.
of being uncomfortable. Yeah, I'm hungry right now, but it's not killing me. There are a few times throughout the afternoon where I've had the temptation to go get spoonful of peanut butter. I love peanut butter, or just something, put something in my mouth. And I have ways to trick it. I drink some decaf and drink water and everything. But I think those little bitty things where you're working on that discipline to push through and work toward your goal just help in everything. And yeah, I have days where I set out to do a 20-hour fast, which when you start fasting is not all that long, really.
Right.
But when I have days where I cave at 15 hours and I'm just so hungry, yeah, I feel like I've let myself down in some ways, but it's like I try not to hold that against myself. I try to understand why. What did it what caused me to really, again, not fail, but to bail on my goal a little bit. And sometimes it's relatively simple. I didn't sleep that well last night. I feel crappy today. My wife and I were both sick for a couple of weeks. We got colds traveling. It's for me to do that when I'm sleeping terribly. I've been sick for a week and a half, something like that. I think learning those things, you can understand, you can help to control your environment to enable you to be more persistent and disciplined and control some of those day-to-day behaviors. So those are just some of the practices that I engage in.
I love it. Yeah. I love that you put that in there as well, to put it more on the process side, and also give yourself some grace, give yourself a little bit of room, because when you're trying to do something like this, there's no right answer. And for all you know, if you're not listening to your body or your mind, you may actually be hurting yourself in some way. So I think that having that level of awareness is really useful. And I love that caveat there and the talk about the process. I want to switch gears because there was so much to cover and we're running out of time. So I want to make sure
Sure.
I hit a lot of it here.
I'm long-winded.
But no, it's all good. So you have a podcast, right? The Passive Wealth Strategy Show. I wanted to ask you your collective thoughts on some key lessons and strategies that you hear over and over again when it comes to developing and reaching either the degrees of freedom or success or number of units, however you measure the progress in life. I'm just curious what you have taken away yourself from being the host of that show.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So there have been so many lessons. I think at this point, as we talk, I've probably done 570 episodes, something, and the vast majority of them are interviews. It's not just me talking. I do some of the me talking ones. I think the people who succeed have a few underlying traits. They all take action to some extent, generally on a day-to-day basis. They all prioritize education. So that's why at the end of my show, I ask all of my guests, what's the best investment you ever made other than in your education? And I didn't put that last caveat on there until probably 100 episodes in, because I realized that almost every successful real estate investor says, my education is the best investment I ever made. And it's an easy answer, sure, but they also do mean it. When you actually talk to them, they mean that education was so key to them. So taking action, setting a goal, not being afraid to get out there and network and meet other successful real estate investors and just talk to them, ask them what's successful, what helped you be successful, what do you need? Talk to them about a deal that they did, something like that. Just being a constant learner, networker, building others up. I think those are all so very, very important to folks' success.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's one of the side effects of actually being on a podcast, right? Very often is
Oh,
that you
yeah.
get to build your network and get to talk with incredible people and have your eyes opened quite often on the air, right? Yeah, that's happened to me so many times. Like we've recorded, I think you're probably number 145 or something like that. And most of our podcasts have been, like you said, with guests on. So probably easily over 100, maybe 120 in that realm. And every single person I've talked to, there is one takeaway that ends up coming in the title of the show that just helps me reinforce a fact or gives me a technique or just helps me create a connection for a resource that maybe I'll need down the line or something. That happens too. And so it's about building those relationships and all of those amazing lessons and things that you're learning. And so I want to thank you just for a moment for giving us some of that advice and distilling all the wisdom down from all those episodes into just a few paragraphs. So I
I
appreciate
tried.
that. No worries. So last question I have for you, and I want to give you a chance to talk about this, is your experience in the Sunbelt markets. For most people who are listening to the show, they're either familiar with real estate investing or know that it's a path for financial freedom, or at least to be able to start to go down that path, which then, as you said, starts enabling some location and time freedom as well for those who are looking for it. So if people were looking to invest in Sunbelt markets, right, what factors do you consider when identifying these real estate opportunities in that region? Are you looking for specific purchase price fundamentals? Are you looking for growth projections? Or do you stay in specific markets or work with potential people over and over again? I just want to hear a little bit more about your investing strategy for those who are interested.
Yeah, absolutely. So our business model is a little unique that enables us to do deals in a lot of different markets and not have to sweat getting distracted by different markets. But for those out there who are looking to get started and go do your own deals, the more you can focus on one market, the better, and get to know it really well, get networked there really well. But as far as things that we look for in the markets that we invest in, number one, it starts with economic fundamentals. So not even looking at real estate. First off, we're going to look at, again, economic fundamentals. What does the job market look like? Is it growing generally? Are employers moving there? We're going to look at population trends and whether people are moving to the city or not, or they're moving away, because there are many places that have generally people moving out of, and we don't want to invest there because we want to invest in scarce assets. We also want to look at the general economic diversity. So if you have a market that is dominated by one major employer, well, that's not great. Or even one major industry that employs most of the people in the area, that's not what we want to look for. We want to look for a somewhat stable employment base. Generally, you don't see too much concentration in the bigger markets. So we're mostly investing in secondary, some tertiary markets, less so primary markets. We're not investing in, say, New York City or anything like that, although that's not the Sunbelt. We invest in the greater Atlanta area, things like that. Economic fundamentals come first and foremost because our tenants pay their rent with their jobs, right? If they're not working, then it's going to be tough to pay rent. When it comes to looking at actual properties, after we've examined the market, looked at the local area to make sure it fits our particular business plan and things along those lines, what do we actually want to do in the area? Physical due diligence is such a big part of real estate investing. And it's tempting, especially early on, tempting to try to skimp on your physical due diligence because you think, hey, I've got a potential opportunity here. And you might not want to walk away from your first deal because you found what you might call a skeleton in the closet, something with the plumbing that you say, oh, we can fix that on the back end once we own it. You get distracted from that thing is going to be really expensive and it's not going to add value to your building at all. So personally, I like somewhat newer buildings. I've been burned by 1960s purchases in the past.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe burned is overstating it, but it just winds up being a bigger headache than it needed to be and more expensive. And you have things that add to the cost without adding to the upside. I've seen other folks make those mistakes too. So investing in slightly newer properties now, not brand new builds because there's less of a value add potential and stuff that's brand new, but generally newer properties in what we generally call B class, somewhere between B minus and B plus class. When I first got started, I started as a C class investor, and that worked okay at the time. We made money in those deals. But as the market has matured and grown, especially with all these rising interest rates, but prior to that, through COVID, we had this huge growth in pricing, which was great if you already owned property. But really what happened was the spreads in terms of price between Class C and say Class B or A properties really narrowed. And we're talking about multiples here. A Class A property is still much more expensive than a Class C, but commercial real estate is valued on its income, and we don't need to get too much into that. I think the case for investing in C class went away because it used to be so cheap to buy. You could make it up. But now since the spreads have narrowed so much, I think B class is really what makes a lot of sense right now. So that's a quick rundown of things that we look at. First starts with the economy. Number one, you drill down deeper and look at the local market, the neighborhood kind of things, because I've seen folks dive into properties that on paper looked really good, but then when you zoomed out a little bit, the couple block by block area just didn't make any sense for buying a property and attempting to raise the rent. And then you look at the property itself, physical due diligence, that kind of a thing. So top down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then you're also looking at the tenant quality as well. And when you have that shift from C class to B class, the tenants get much better as well. And they're the people that are actually partnering with you. So if you have great tenants that are inside the property, it makes it so much easier on the property manager. And then that trickles up to profits, right? So if the expectation is that people go in to pay rents and the people that are living in your building have that expectation also, then that's good. And it's really weird for me to say that because sometimes there are C class tenants and D class tenants that come in and don't have that expectation, right? They walk in and they're like, yeah, I'll pay rent for 6 months or something. Maybe they don't know it at the time, but that is their intention. It's not as serious as like a B or A class tenant would take it. And so all of that, plus what you said, it's beautifully or articulated. And I couldn't agree more with what you said there. So unfortunately, we have run out of time for all of our main format questions. But I do have something that I want to ask you, and it's the rapid round, and it's 5 or 6 questions that I ask every one of our guests, and they're meant to be answered in a 30-second fashion. And so if you're up for it, we're going to go ahead and ask them rapidly to you, unless you want to say something real quick about what I just said before. And then we can go.
I'm sure I could, but I know I've been talking a lot already. So please go ahead.
It's all good, man. You got it. All right, let's head into the rapid round. All right, number 1, name any resource that was or is essential in your journey to pursue freedom right now.
That is a good question. I've been tracking my income, net worth, expenses, everything financially since the beginning of my financial life. I think I was in college at the time, so quite a long time ago now. I've been tracking that meticulously in a personal a budgeting app. I don't want to really say which one just for security purposes, but that is key. It doesn't take that long to do on a daily or weekly basis. And I can look back for, I don't know, 13 or 14 years and see what I spent my money on, where I made my money, everything like that. And it's just helpful to see, okay, here's what my net worth was 3 years ago. And I see that right now, or what I earn right now, that kind of a thing. And seeing that growth. And then we don't always want to extrapolate, but I do want to extrapolate. To me, that's just so inspiring. But also when you have a stagnant time, it's okay, I can see I'm falling behind a little bit. I need to kick it up. What am I doing wrong? So really track your income, spending, net worth, everything like that's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so it gives you the opportunity to measure what it is that you're trying to achieve in the first place, which is ultimately where every goal needs to start. I love that. Number two, if you woke up and your business was gone and you had $500, a laptop, a place to live, and some food, what would you do first?
Try to find my wife. Uh,
Yeah. If your wife was still with you, let's just say that you and your wife were okay, but you had to start over. What would you do?
yeah, absolutely. Honestly, it's just the way I am. I know a lot of other people would disagree with this. They would try to find something to drop ship or something and through their laptop. My first priority, how do I get a job so I can make sure all my needs are really taken care of? Because we gotta, I think about providing first in that way. Beyond that, if you want to succeed in real estate investing, if we're focusing on that, go to your local real estate networking event, talk with people nearby and find out what they need. Personally, wholesaling isn't exactly what I ever envisioned myself doing in real estate, but if you need a way to get in and make money without a ton of money in your bank account, that can be a way to go. 500 is not a lot. You're not going to do mailers with that or any kind of thing, but you could go do driving for dollars and go do some quick deals. So that's probably how I would attack it to get some capital in the bank. But to me, first thing to do, find a way to stop the bleeding, get ourselves on a stable footing. And that might, I think you said that's built into the question, but to me, it's hard to envision being in that scenario and not starting with the base level of something I heard. Sorry, I'm not going to go too long about this, but Grant Cardone, people have different feelings about him. I go back and forth, but one of the things that I heard him say once that I thought really made a lot of sense is that a job is a gift, right? If somebody's employing you, they're paying you for your time and expertise. They're doing something for you. You need to do something back for them in return, of course, in order to keep the job. But we've gotten to the point where everybody wants to sell the next app or whatever. And I think that's a little bit misguided.
Yeah, said. Thank you for that. That's good. That makes a lot of sense. And I think I would do something along the same lines as you if my business is vaporized, right? At the very least, you could go to a RIA with an amazing story as to why your business vaporized. And a lot of people would probably want to hear about that. All right.
I would want to know. Yeah.
Yeah. Number three. What does your daily, weekly, monthly cadence for self-reflection and goal setting practices look like?
So I've gone back and forth about this, honestly. Years ago, I had a really strong meditation practice, and that was at a time in my life where I was less happy, not unhappy necessarily, but less happy with what was going on. It was pretty early in my real estate career, if you will, or real estate adventure where I hadn't done anything. Lately, like I said, I do yoga, I do jujitsu. So I think about that a lot. Like if I have a particular weekend where I'm not being disciplined about my dieting, if you will, I always try to bear that in mind and keep that. Another thing that I track, actually, I haven't mentioned this. I haven't actually told anybody about this, but I have over a decade worth of weight data for myself. Not every single day, but I need to count the data points. It's probably several thousand data points for what my weight was over time. So I think just tracking things like that, like I mentioned before, I track my money fastidiously. You can just look back and see, okay, how am I doing? What's my trend? Whatever it is. And you can, at least for me, I think to myself, okay, what did I do that caused this trend to go in this way? Because you shouldn't just reflect about the ticks down in terms of whether it's your net worth or your weight if you gain weight technically. Just don't just think about the negatives, think about the positive things. If your goal is obviously to grow your net worth, okay, what did I do that made it grow? If your goal is to lose weight, I have times where I'm trying to trim a few pounds off, so I haven't been taking care of it. If my weight goes down, okay, what did I do that put me in the right direction. So I think tracking things like that and reflecting really helps me quite a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something real quick here I want to also add, I know it's supposed to be the rapid round, is that when you're tracking stuff, you should continue to track even if things aren't going your way, right?
Yes,
You got to
100%.
have the discipline to do that, because then you can look back and learn something from it. That's the whole point of tracking something. And weight is a great example, like you had said before. So I appreciate you with the transparency and the vulnerability there to share that with the audience. I love it. All
I
right.
stopped tracking in the first 2 months of COVID, and it went way up because I was very unhappy in the first 2 months of COVID. So anyway.
There you go. Last question I have for you today is, what are the core work habits that you attribute to your success?
So I have one of the things that's helped me a ton is I have what's on my desk right now, clipboard, pad of paper, and I write up to 3 bullet points of things that I either need to get done or want to get done today. And I restrict myself from making that list longer. The key is I need to write down the things that I have to work on now. If I cross one off, I can add one more. That's okay. But I think that helps me personally stay focused. In my personal life, I mentioned earlier that we have a house that I love working on, but if you're a homeowner and you like doing these things, that list can get really long of stuff that you're in the middle of. And I don't want to be the Joe Schmo homeowner with a bunch of 50% finished projects. I want a lot of finished projects, even if it's not all the projects I want to get to. So I have a whiteboard over here, has up to 3 things. That is it on the list on the house that I'm working on. And I think, to me, having visual cues and indicators like that help me stay focused. And you know what? I learned that through training jiu-jitsu, because I learned through jiu-jitsu that I can only really work on 1 or 2 techniques at a time. If I'm trying to learn everything that I'm being shown and taught, I basically learn nothing. So being able to focus on a couple of things, it helps in every way. And if you practice that in your life, your business, it works wonders.
Wonderful. Taylor, this has been amazing having you on the show. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all of your wisdom and some of the inner workings of what happens in that noggin of yours to keep yourself successfully motivated and move forward through to whatever it is that you're trying to build for yourself, whether it's discipline, business, a life, or a happy marriage. All of those things, I know that you're going to be successful in doing that. But before we go, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit more about how they can find you, what you have going on, and just open floor in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you've mentioned, my podcast is the Passive Wealth Strategy Show, which you've been on, although the episode has not been released at the time of recording. So that'll be coming out. Look for Derek on my show. If you would like, I have a free 7-day video course on red flags in passive real estate investing, kind of short form videos that'll teach you 7 red flags that I've found in my time as a real estate investor. PassiveRealEstateCourse.com. Or if you'd like to learn about investing with us, investwithtaylor.com.
Amazing. We'll also link to all of those, plus your social media credentials, if you provided any in the production information. We're going to be going ahead and dropping those also in the show notes. And for those listeners who have listened all the way to this point, we want to thank you as well. Please, wherever you're watching or listening to this, please engage with us, comment, subscribe, please. So that way we can get more exposure to more people just like you, and also more incredible guests just like Taylor as well. So thank you to everyone. And once again, Taylor, amazing to have you on. Really appreciate it.
Great to be here. To the listeners, if you haven't talked to Derek, man, reach out to him. He's a fun guy to talk to. I think you and I talked for 2 hours when you came on my show off the air.
We did.
So yeah, hit up Derek.
It was fun. Yeah, definitely, for sure. And I want to talk with each and every one of you guys. So please reach out. Want to find out more about all of you guys and how we can help provide more incredible content for you all. And thank you guys for listening. We will see you guys next week. Take care.